My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 44 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina, in a stone and cedar house on Sunset Ridge that my husband Daniel and I bought together 12 years ago, back when our girls were still small enough to nap in the same room. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found your way to Silent Revenge Stories, because this channel exists for women exactly like me, women who got underestimated by the people who should have loved them most, and if that's ever been you, go ahead and hit subscribe right now, because I promise you're going to need somewhere to feel understood by the time this story is over. Daniel died 8 months ago in a highway accident on his way back from a job site in Charlotte, and if you've never lost a husband suddenly, I can tell you that grief doesn't arrive politely. It arrives like weather. And while I was still standing in the wreckage of my own life, trying to figure out how to explain to 2 little girls why their father wasn't coming home, my mother-in-law Patricia was already circling. Patricia had never liked me, not really, not since the day Daniel brought me home to meet her 15 years ago. She used to introduce me at church functions as Daniel's wife, instead of using my name, like I was a temporary arrangement rather than a permanent fixture in her son's life. But grief has a strange way of softening old grudges, or at least I thought it did, because in the first few weeks after the funeral, Patricia showed up at my door almost every single day with casseroles and offers to take the girls to school, and I let myself believe that maybe, finally, we were becoming family in the way I'd always hoped we would. I was so exhausted, so hollowed out by loss, that I welcomed the help without asking a single question about why a 71-year-old woman who used to complain about driving 20 minutes to see her grandchildren was suddenly available every single afternoon. It was my sister Denise who noticed it first, actually. Denise flew in from Tampa for the 6-month anniversary of Daniel's passing, and on her second night in town, she pulled me into the kitchen after Patricia left and asked me a question that changed everything. "Rachel, why does your mother-in-law have a key to a lockbox on your porch that I've never seen before?" I told her she was imagining things, that Patricia probably just left something for the girls, but Denise wasn't buying it, and neither, once I actually thought about it, was I. That night, after the girls were asleep, I walked out onto the porch with a flashlight and found a small combination lockbox zip-tied to the railing behind a potted fern, the kind real estate agents used to store spare keys for showings. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. The house was in Daniel's name and mine, jointly, but here's the detail that Patricia was counting on nobody remembering. 3 years before Daniel and I got married, before the title was ever transferred into both our names, Daniel's late father had technically co-signed the original mortgage alongside young Daniel to help him qualify for the loan, and although that co-signature had been legally removed from the deed years ago when Daniel refinanced, Patricia had apparently held on to old paperwork, bank statements, and even an outdated notarized document from that original transaction. She had been quietly meeting with a real estate agent named Wendy Sutton, a woman from her book club, telling Wendy a story about helping settle her late son's estate, and claiming she had authority to sell the property because of that old, expired, legally meaningless paperwork. I want you to imagine, for a second, coming home from picking your daughters up from soccer practice and finding a for sale sign lying flat in the trunk of your mother-in-law's Buick because she hadn't quite worked up the nerve to plant it in your front yard yet. That's exactly what happened to me on a Tuesday afternoon in April, and I nearly threw up in the driveway. I didn't confront her that day. I want to be completely honest with you about why. I was scared. Scared that if I said something and I was wrong, I would blow up a relationship my daughters still needed. Scared that if I was right, this woman who had access to my house, my children, and apparently my late husband's old financial documents, would escalate before I had any way to protect myself. So instead of confronting her, I did something Patricia never expected. I got quiet, and I got smart. The very next morning, I called a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb, whose office was tucked into a converted Victorian near downtown Asheville, and I laid everything out for him: the lockbox, the outdated paperwork, the meetings with Wendy Sutton that my neighbor Carol had also mentioned seeing. Marcus told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Rachel, in North Carolina, if someone attempts to sell a property using expired or fraudulent authority, that's not just a civil matter, that's potentially criminal fraud, and if we build the case correctly and quietly, she will hang herself with her own paper trail." That sentence became my anchor for the next 4 months. If you're just now joining this story, please make sure you're subscribed to Silent Revenge Stories, because I want you here for the part where Patricia finds out exactly how much I knew and exactly how long I'd known it, and trust me, that part is coming. Marcus and I built our case slowly and carefully. First, we pulled the full, current title history on the property, which confirmed in black and white that Daniel's father's name had been legally removed from the deed 9 years earlier, meaning Patricia had absolutely zero legal claim to the house. Second, Marcus sent a formal records request to Wendy Sutton's brokerage, which forced Wendy's firm to produce every email and listing document Patricia had submitted, and that paper trail was damning. Patricia had told Wendy, in writing, that she was the surviving co-owner acting on behalf of the estate, which was a flat-out lie she'd apparently rehearsed enough times that she believed it herself. Third, and this is the part that still makes my hands shake a little when I think about it, my neighbor Carol, bless her nosy, wonderful heart, had a video doorbell that caught Patricia on our property on 2 separate occasions taking photographs of the house's exterior for what turned out to be a listing packet. While all of this was happening behind the scenes, Patricia's behavior in front of me and the girls grew bolder, almost mocking. She started making comments at Sunday dinners about how big houses are so much work for a widow alone, and how she'd hate to see me struggling to keep up with the mortgage. She once told my 7-year-old, Sophie, in front of me, that maybe Grandma will find you and your sister a cozier place to live soon, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to keep from screaming. I remember sitting on the edge of my bathtub that night, texting Marcus a single line: "She just told my daughter we might be moving. How much longer do we wait?" Marcus told me we needed one more piece, the actual signed listing agreement, before we moved. Patricia was smart enough to almost get away clean, but she made one mistake that no forged paperwork could undo: she underestimated how much attention a grieving daughter-in-law was actually paying. Here's where the story takes its first real turn, because Patricia wasn't working alone. My brother-in-law Chris, Daniel's younger brother, had been staying unusually close to his mother during this whole period, driving up from Greenville almost every weekend, and I initially assumed it was grief bringing them together. It wasn't. Chris had gotten himself into serious debt from a failed restaurant venture, somewhere north of $80,000, and Patricia, in a moment of pure desperation and misplaced maternal loyalty, had promised him a cut of the house sale to bail him out, framing it to him as money that should have gone to the family anyway. I only found this out because Chris's wife, Amanda, who had never fully trusted Patricia's version of events, quietly forwarded me a text message Chris had accidentally sent to the wrong group chain, one that included the words, "Once Mom closes on Rachel's place, I'll finally get square with the bank." I read that message 4 times before I could even process what I was looking at. My husband's own brother was helping his mother rob his brother's children. I didn't confront Amanda or Chris either, not yet. Marcus and I added it to the file. We were building something much bigger than a simple property dispute now. we were documenting a coordinated scheme, and North Carolina law takes a very different view of coordinated fraud than it does of a single confused elderly woman making an honest mistake. Marcus filed a formal notice with the County Register of Deeds flagging the title as disputed, which meant that no closing could legally proceed without the fraud being addressed first, but crucially, he asked the registrar's office to hold that notice quietly rather than issue public alerts, because he wanted Patricia to walk all the way to the closing table believing she'd won. By early July, Wendy Sutton had found a buyer, a young couple relocating from Ohio named the Pattersons, who fell in love with the house during a private showing Patricia arranged while I had taken the girls to visit my parents for a week. Patricia had told the Pattersons a heartbreaking story about a family needing to move on after tragedy, which, when I found out about it later, made me so angry I had to go for a run just to keep from crying in front of my kids. The closing was scheduled for the third Saturday in July, timed, I later realized, to coincide with what would have been Daniel and Patricia's late husband's wedding anniversary weekend, apparently for sentimental cover. I want to pause here and tell you the moment I knew, without any doubt, exactly how far Patricia was willing to go, because it's the moment that hardened me completely. 2 weeks before the scheduled closing, Patricia asked to take the girls for a special sleepover, and while they were at her house, I got a call from Sophie's teacher letting me know that Patricia had shown up at Sophie's school claiming to be picking her up for a dentist appointment that didn't exist, using an old emergency contact form that listed her as an authorized guardian. The school, thankfully, called me to verify first. When I picked Sophie up myself that afternoon, shaking, I understood that Patricia wasn't just trying to steal a house. She was trying to establish herself as more involved, more essential, more in control of my daughter's lives, likely so that if I fought back legally, she could paint herself as a hands-on grandmother being cruelly cut out by a bitter, unstable widow. That's when I stopped being scared of her, and started being ready for her. If you've made it this far, I need you to comment below and tell me the moment in your own life when fear turned into resolve, because I read every single one of those comments, and honestly, they're what keep this channel going. And please, subscribe to Silent Revenge Stories if you haven't yet, because the next part of this story is the part Patricia is still talking about in therapy, I promise you that. Marcus and I made our final move exactly 9 days before the closing date. We didn't go to Patricia directly. Instead, Marcus filed an emergency motion with the court, requesting a temporary restraining order against the sale, supported by the full evidentiary file, the outdated deed paperwork, Wendy Sutton's brokerage emails, Carol's doorbell footage, the forwarded text from Chris, and a sworn statement from the title company confirming Patricia had no legal ownership interest whatsoever. The judge granted it within 48 hours. But Marcus and I made a decision together that felt almost cinematic in hindsight. We asked the court to hold the formal notification until the day of the scheduled family dinner Patricia had planned to celebrate the upcoming sale, a dinner she had, with breathtaking audacity, invited me and the girls to attend, apparently planning to break the news to us gently over pot roast, framing it as her generously helping manage things, now that I was alone. That dinner was held at Patricia's house on Sunset Ridge's Sister Street, with 30 relatives crammed into her dining room and spilling into the backyard, everyone from Daniel's cousins to his Aunt Georgette, who flew in from Ohio believing she was attending an early anniversary remembrance for Daniel. I wore the navy dress Daniel always loved, and I sat directly across from Patricia, watching her beam through the entire meal, clearly rehearsing her big announcement. She waited until dessert, tapping her wine glass with a fork, and stood up to tell the family that she had made some difficult but necessary decisions to protect this family's future, and that the house on Sunset Ridge was being sold, effective in 9 days, with proceeds going toward settling outstanding family obligations. I watched Chris stare determinedly at his plate. I watched Amanda's jaw tighten. And I watched Patricia turn to me with a practiced, sympathetic smile, clearly expecting tears, or shock, or maybe gratitude. That's when the doorbell rang. Marcus had arranged for a county process server to arrive at exactly that moment, along with a sheriff's deputy for documentation purposes, delivering the restraining order and the formal fraud notice directly to Patricia in front of every single person she had gathered to witness her triumph. The deputy read the order aloud, clearly, in that flat official tone that makes every word land like a stone, detailing the disputed title, the fraudulent listing, and the immediate legal cessation of any sale proceedings. I watched Patricia's face drain of color in real time. And that's when I stood up, set my wine glass down, and said the words I'd been holding onto for 4 months. I already knew, Patricia. I've known for 4 months. I have every email. I have the footage from Carol's doorbell. I have Chris's text message about paying off his restaurant debt with my daughter's inheritance. I know about the fake dentist appointment you used to try to take Sophie out of school. I let you keep walking because I wanted you standing exactly here, in front of everyone who loves this family, when the truth finally caught up to you. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever experienced. Georgette, Daniel's aunt, was the first to speak, and she looked at Patricia with an expression of pure, devastated betrayal, asking quietly, "Pat, is this true?" Patricia didn't answer. She sat back down, slowly, her hands trembling around her napkin, and Chris finally looked up from his plate, tears in his eyes, and said, "Mom, I told you this was a bad idea," which, honestly, felt like the smallest, weakest apology I have ever heard, but it was still an admission in front of witnesses, and Marcus later told me it strengthened our case considerably. The legal fallout moved quickly after that. Wendy Sutton's brokerage, facing potential liability for failing to verify ownership, immediately withdrew from the listing and issued a formal apology to me in writing. The Pattersons, the young couple who'd fallen in love with our house, were devastated to learn they'd nearly bought a property under fraudulent pretenses, but they were gracious about it once they understood the full situation. The title dispute was formally resolved within 6 weeks, with the court issuing a permanent injunction against Patricia ever attempting to claim, list, or transfer any interest in the Sunset Ridge property again. Patricia was also referred for potential criminal fraud charges related to the falsified estate authority claims, though ultimately, out of consideration for my daughters not wanting to watch their grandmother face jail time, I asked the prosecutor's office to consider a lesser resolution, which resulted in Patricia entering a court-supervised restitution agreement and losing her real estate power of attorney privileges permanently, along with a formal restraining order limiting unsupervised contact with my daughters until further court review. As for Chris, something unexpected happened. Watching his mother's scheme collapse in front of the entire family seemed to shake something loose in him. He came to my house 3 weeks later, alone, and apologized in a way that actually felt real, explaining how deep his financial desperation had gotten and how his mother had convinced him this was somehow owed to the family. I didn't forgive him easily, and I told him that trust, once broken like that, doesn't just come back because you apologize once. But I also didn't shut the door completely, because my daughters still needed an uncle, and Amanda had been nothing but honest with me through the entire ordeal. We're rebuilding that relationship slowly, carefully, on my terms. Patricia and I have not spoken since that dinner. She sends birthday cards to the girls through a family mediator now, which the court requires, and someday, when they're older, I'll tell my daughters the full truth of what almost happened to their home, their inheritance, and their sense of safety, so they understand exactly what it looks like when a woman decides quiet strength is more powerful than loud confrontation. I kept the house. I kept my girls safe. And I learned, in the hardest possible way, that sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't rage or shouting, it's simply out-preparing the person who underestimated you until the moment the truth arrives is entirely on your terms. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe to Silent Revenge Stories right now, because there are so many more women out there who fought their own quiet battles and won, and I want to keep telling their stories right alongside mine. And before you go, I'd love for you to leave a comment below telling me the one lesson you're taking from my story tonight, because whether it's document everything, or trust your gut when something feels wrong, or simply grief does not make you weak, I read every single word you write, and I promise you, this community is stronger because of every one of you who shows up here. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.